The airport curb was quiet now, emptied of the buzz that once surrounded her. She sat on the cold concrete ledge, hunched beneath a flickering yellow street lamp, her luggage beside her untouched. A half-empty coffee cup, cold and bitter by now, rested between her palms. Her phone, once a lifeline, blinked its low battery warning for the third time in 10 minutes. 12 hours had passed. She'd arrived with hope, maybe naive, maybe foolish, but hope nonetheless. He had said he'd come, that this time would be different, that he just needed space, time, clarity. She had believed him, or perhaps she had wanted to. People rushed past her in waves, some dragging kids in pajamas, others laughing into phones, some with tired eyes fixed on their destinations. She watched it all, watched the sun shift from gold to gray and the sky melt into a deep bruised purple. Flights landed, cars pulled in, doors slammed, life continued, but he never came. Not a text, not a call, not a single word. The battery icon went red, then black. She didn't cry, not at first. There was something numbing about waiting so long, that even pain gave up. She shifted her legs. Her spine ached from the bench. The night air bit through her thin sweater. At one point, an older woman with a kind face offered her a granola bar and a knowing smile, the kind that recognized heartbreak without needing the story. She took it and nodded, silence her only thanks. Inside, something broke quietly. Not with drama, not with screams, but with the kind of silent fracture that doesn't heal right. This wasn't just abandonment. It was a message, a choice. She stared down the long, empty road, cars occasionally sweeping past, each one a reminder that someone, somewhere was being picked up, welcomed, loved, and she was not. She hadn't just been forgotten. She had been discarded. There was a time when the world revolved around the curve of her son's smile. Back when life was a quiet war, she waged alone. Every morning started before the sun rose, her hands rough with work before others even stirred. She had been mother and father both, protector and provider, carrying the weight of two roles on shoulders not meant to bear such heaviness. When he was little, she'd walk him to school through the bitter winter chill, her coat unzipped so he could wear both his sweater and hers. She'd pack his lunch with one apple and a sandwich, claiming she wasn't hungry so he wouldn't feel guilty, when in truth her stomach had long since grown used to silence. She worked 2 jobs, 3 when the bills mounted, her back aching and her eyes dry from sleepless nights. And yet, she never once let him feel the fear she buried daily. When he cried over a scraped knee, she held him like he was made of porcelain. When he failed his math exam, she stayed up late teaching him equations, though she barely understood them herself. When he came home from his first heartbreak, she let him break down in her lap, her hands in his hair, whispering that no one who failed to love him deserved him anyway. She was there for every school play, every exam result, every fever, and every dream. She saved every drawing, every thank you note, tucked in an old box beneath her bed like sacred relics. When he fell in love, she welcomed his bride like her own daughter. She sold the last pieces of her mother's jewelry, heirlooms she once promised herself she'd keep forever, to help pay for the wedding expenses. When he and his new wife wanted a home, she didn't hesitate. She put her own house up as a down payment. She moved into the smaller room, gave them the master, cooked for them, smiled at their happiness, and told herself this was what love looked like. Her name was never on the deed, but she didn't care. She had never been in it for ownership. She was there for him, always for him. Through every milestone and every mistake, she stood like a lighthouse, unwavering, never asking for anything, more than to be kept close. She was more than a mother. She had become his shelter, the safe place he never had to think twice about. His quiet shadow, his backup plan, the one who would always say, "It's okay," even when it wasn't. But over time, something shifted. The calls came less. The dinners were quieter. His wife's smiles got thinner, polite rather than warm. Decisions were made without her. She was consulted less and tolerated more. Her room became smaller, not just in space, but in presence. She kept giving, hoping they would see, but they never really looked. And even then, she loved. Even then, she gave. Because she had built her life around his. Her dreams had become his stepping stones. Her sacrifices, invisible pavement beneath. His success. And as she sat in that airport silence, replaying each memory like a slow reel of devotion, the truth burned into her chest. She gave him her everything. Even when she had nothing left for herself. He had promised he'd be there, said it twice over the phone and once more in a text. "I'll come get you myself, Ma. Don't worry, just rest a bit on the flight." She had clung to those words like a child to a threadbare blanket, worn but comforting. The plane landed just after noon, her suitcase heavy but her heart light. This was supposed to be a joyful weekend, the rehearsal dinner tonight, the wedding. After, she had spent hours choosing her outfit, pressing every pleat with care, selecting earrings that weren't too flashy but still special. She stood at the arrivals gate, scanning every face, every car that slowed. Her son wasn't there. Not in the first hour, not the second. She tried calling, straight to voicemail, again and again. She sat down, the metal bench unforgiving. Beneath her, phone clutched tightly in her lap. Strangers passed. The airport emptied and refilled. The sun slid low in the sky, casting long shadows across the tiles. Still, no one came. By the 6th hour, her hand was trembling from the chill. The coffee she'd bought long since gone lukewarm and then cold. A cab driver eventually took pity and offered her his phone charger. She declined. Something in her had stopped trying. When the terminal lights flickered on, painting everything in sterile white, she finally hailed a taxi herself. The address her son gave was saved in her phone. When she arrived, the house was buzzing, full of music, laughter, movement, guests, flowers, trays of hors d'oeuvres. She walked in, suitcase still in hand, and was met with stunned faces. Her son rushed toward her, eyes wide with guilt, his tie still being fixed by a groomsman. "Ma, I'm so sorry. It was just chaos. We forgot. There was so much happening. We thought someone else was picking you up." Behind him, his fiancée stood beside the catering table, wineglass in hand, her expression passive. "It's been madness," she said with a shrug, before disappearing back into the crowd. Someone else had taken her seat at the rehearsal dinner. A distant cousin, or a friend of the bride, she wasn't told. Her name card had been replaced. They squeezed. In a folding chair for her at the back corner of the long table, near the servers. No one noticed her plate came late. No one offered to refill her glass. She laughed when others did, nodded when spoken to, smiled for every photo. But inside, something had quietly snapped. It wasn't the forgetting. It wasn't the inconvenience. It was the realization, a shattering awareness, that she was no longer central in his life. She wasn't the first call, or the second, or even the third. She was an afterthought in a celebration she had helped build. Every bite she took felt forced, her throat dry, her heart heavier than any suitcase she had ever carried. And still, she smiled, because that's what she always did. But the crack had formed, deep and silent, and something inside her, something essential, began to break. The days after the wedding slipped by with an eerie quietness. No calls, no messages, not even a casual check-in to ask if she made it home safely. She had taken the same cab back to her small apartment, the one she had given up once, years ago, to help them buy their first home. Now she lived alone again, in a space that once bustled with dreams and promises, now reduced to silence and the soft hum of the fridge. She kept checking her phone out of habit, refreshing messages that never came. The photo of her and her son at the rehearsal dinner, the only one she was in, sat framed on her table, but the smile she wore in it looked unfamiliar now, forced, fragile. The family group chat, once buzzing with laughter and emojis and wedding prep, had gone silent. Her last message, "You both looked beautiful, I'm so proud," remained on read. No hearts, no replies, not even a thumbs up. When she called 2 days later just to say hello, it went to voicemail. Again, then again. Her son finally replied with a single text the next morning, "Hey, super busy, talk soon." He didn't. She saw pictures of their honeymoon on social media, palm trees, matching sunglasses, breakfast in bed with exotic fruit, a champagne bottle between them. Everyone in the comments raved, "Deserved," "Power couple," endless, "Blessings." No one asked where she was. No one noticed she hadn't posted anything in days, not even on her birthday. Her birthday came and went like a whisper. No flowers, no cake, not even a card. She made herself a small plate of leftover, rice and dal, reheated in the microwave, sat at the table alone. She stared at the single candle she placed in a tiny cupcake from the corner shop. Not because she believed in wishes anymore, but because rituals are hard to break. She didn't light it. She didn't sing. She just sat there, chewing slowly, the room dim and heavy. The silence was louder on birthdays. One friend, an old coworker, messaged her mid-afternoon. "Hey, are you okay? Haven't seen you around. Need anything?" She stared at the screen for several minutes, then typed, "I'm just resting. All good." She added a smiling emoji. It felt like a betrayal to herself, but the truth felt too heavy to put into words. What could she say? That she had never felt so invisible? That the child she had once poured her soul into had moved on so fully that he couldn't spare a minute, not even for her birthday? She didn't tell anyone about the rice, about the candle that stayed unlit, about how she cleaned up slowly, rinsed her plate in the sink, and wiped the table with care like she was expecting someone to notice. She didn't tell them how she sat on the couch afterward, staring out the window for hours, phone face up on the armrest, just in case. Nothing came. That night, she lay in bed thinking back to the time when her son was 6 and he had made her a birthday card with a crooked heart and the words, "You're my best friend." She had saved it for years, yellowed and curled at the corners. She remembered thinking, back then, that love like that would never fade. But it had. Or maybe it had evolved into distance, into forgetting, into silence. She wrapped the cardigan around herself tighter, the one she always wore when she missed, the feel of being needed. She wasn't angry, not really, just hollow, forgotten. She thought of all the things she had given up so he could rise, the meals, the dreams, the time. And maybe that was the mistake. Maybe she hadn't raised him wrong in the way people often think, spoiled or arrogant or entitled. Maybe she raised him too well in one way. Maybe the real problem was she raised him to believe she'd always be there, that no matter what he did or didn't do, she'd never leave. And maybe that was where she went wrong. She wasn't looking for anything in particular that day, just something to do, a distraction to fill the aching quiet that clung to the walls like humidity. The drawer was a mess of old receipts, tangled charger, cords, faded photographs, and the kind of forgotten paperwork only a mother keeps track of. She hadn't opened it in months, maybe longer. But when she pulled it open, a manila envelope slid forward, its contents threatening to spill. Curious, she opened it and started sifting through. At first, it was mundane. Electric bills, doctor. Appointment cards, insurance pamphlets. Then she saw it. 2 printed tickets to Mauritius. The departure date matched the one she had seen in the honeymoon photos. Her heart stalled. She turned the pages over and saw the fine print. Her name, in the billing section. Her credit card number, her address. She flipped to the final page. Payment method, Credit. Total, $5,412. Remaining balance, unpaid. She sat there, fingers trembling, eyes locked on the paper like it might change if she blinked hard enough. They had booked their honeymoon using her credit, her generosity, and never mentioned it. No reimbursement, no thank you, not even an acknowledgement. It wasn't just the money, it was the betrayal disguised in silence. She dug deeper, heart now racing, and found another sheet, her signature at the bottom of a guarantor form for a travel loan they'd taken out months ago. Again, nothing ever said. They had used her name to build memories they didn't even invite her into. She leaned back in the chair, her breath shallow. All this time she'd blamed herself, for giving too much, for loving too hard, for not setting boundaries. But this was different. This was calculated, thoughtless at best, cruel at worst. Her fingers drifted to her phone, not even realizing what she was doing, and she tapped into her old voicemails, a habit she hadn't returned to in years. Scrolling past spam and doctor confirmations, she found one she hadn't deleted. A voice message from her late husband, dated nearly a decade ago. Her breath caught as she hit play. His voice came through, rough, gentle, full of the kind of kindness that's now extinct in her world. "Hey, I know you're probably running around like usual," he began, with a soft chuckle. "But I just wanted to remind you, don't ever let them treat you like wallpaper, all right? You're not here to blend in. You're here to be seen, to be loved out loud." She clutched the phone to her chest as tears welled in her eyes, the kind of tears that come from being reminded of a version of yourself you forgot existed. She had spent so many years shrinking, bending, making space for others to shine. She had convinced herself that selflessness was virtue. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped being seen. They had hung her in the background, like wallpaper. Familiar, comforting, silent. The voicemail ended, but the words hung in the air. Something sharp bloomed inside her. Not just pain anymore, but a strange and unfamiliar strength. The kind that comes when grief and anger align to form clarity. She thought about every time she'd been passed over, brushed off, taken for granted. Every time she had said, "It's fine," when it wasn't. Every moment she'd swallowed, hurt to keep the peace. She stood up slowly, the envelope still in her hand, and walked to the window. Outside, the city moved on as it always did, cars honking, birds darting between power lines, children laughing in the distance. But inside her, the silence cracked open. She knew now what had to be done, not for revenge, not to make a scene, but for herself, because for once, she wanted to reclaim the pieces they had taken without asking. They had made that booking under her name. They had written her into the foundation of their future and pretended she wasn't there. They took her love, her credit, her trust, all without blinking. But what they didn't take was her right to say, enough. Her right to reclaim her place, her voice, her worth. She walked back to her desk and pulled out a fresh notebook. She began making a list, not of what she'd lost, but of what she still had the power to change. And as she looked once more at the tickets, something in her face hardened with purpose. They booked the trip with her name, so she took it back. She didn't rush. No storming through doors, no grand confrontations, no angry phone calls laced with betrayal. Instead, she sat quietly at her kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She opened her laptop, fingers calm, heart steady. Her son's face flashed in her mind, not the boy who used to fall asleep on her chest, but the man who had walked past her at the rehearsal dinner without noticing the sadness in her eyes. She exhaled once and clicked through her emails. There they were, the confirmation numbers, the itinerary, the details of the trip she had unknowingly paid for. The airline's customer service line rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. She provided the necessary information, explained calmly that the booking had been made without her authorization and requested a cancellation. She didn't offer stories. She didn't explain her connection to the passengers. She used the word unauthorized. It was all they needed. Within 30 minutes, the tickets were canceled. She hung up and stared at the screen. A fraud claim came next. The process was simple, methodical. She filled out the form, uploaded a scanned copy of the original credit statement, and included a brief note. Charges were made without consent. That was all. No emotion, no bitterness, just truth. The refund would take up to 7 business days, the bank said. She nodded and closed her laptop. The next day, she made another booking. This one entirely her own. A quiet beach town, 3 hours away. A modest inn with sea views. A local bookshop just down the street. She added a massage for the second day and made a mental note to bring her old sketchbook. She hadn't drawn in years. Maybe she'd try again. No announcement was made, no cryptic social media posts, no passive-aggressive status updates. She didn't need anyone to know. She wasn't looking to prove a point to them. This wasn't about them. Not anymore. She packed lightly, a sun hat, a swimsuit she hadn't worn in a decade, 2 books she never finished, and the cardigan she always reached for when the nights turned cool. She left the curtains open in her apartment as she walked. Out, sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. The city behind her buzzed as usual, unaware that something subtle but profound had shifted. She didn't cry this time. She didn't need to. What she had done was quiet, almost invisible from the outside. But it was hers, her choice, her power. She didn't shout. She didn't explain. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply clicked cancel. At the airport, the newlywed couple wheeled their designer luggage up to the check-in counter. Flushed with excitement, fingers laced together, ready to begin the perfect honeymoon they believed they had effortlessly orchestrated. But as the attendant typed in their reservation number, her polite smile faltered. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes darting to the screen. These tickets were canceled. They're void, non-refundable. Confusion turned to disbelief, then panic. Voices raised, hands flailed, credit cards were pulled out in desperation, but nothing worked. The booking was gone, the seats reallocated, the itinerary erased. The only record that remained was the name of the cardholder, her name, and she had taken it back. Her son's messages began almost immediately. "Mom, did you do something to the tickets?" Another followed seconds later. "We're stuck. Please answer." Then a phone call. She didn't pick up. His name flashed on the screen 4 times in a row. Then his wife's. Then a group video call attempt. She looked at the phone once, then flipped it over, screen side down on the table beside her lemon tea. The sound of the waves outside her window rolled in gentle, endless rhythm, a lullaby for her nerves. She was sitting on a white balcony, wrapped in the sea breeze, a paperback novel on her lap, sunlight warming the tops of her feet. Peaceful, undisturbed. The tea was slightly tart, the kind she always meant to drink more of but never found time for, until now. She took a sip and exhaled slowly. There was no gloating, no vindictive thrill, just space, just calm. A kind of quiet justice that didn't need an audience. She wasn't punishing them. She was simply done paying for people who didn't see her. She had spent a lifetime covering costs, emotional, financial, spiritual, so others could feel secure. Now she was investing in herself. Back at the airport, their frantic messages piled up unanswered. A flurry of words trying to undo what had already been done. "We're sorry. Just call us, please." But her phone remained silent. By choice. The same silence they had once left her in. The same silence she had sat in at the terminal that night. The same silence on her birthday, in the group chat, in their actions. Now it was theirs to sit in. Alone. She glanced at the sea once more, its horizon endless and open. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply existed in the moment, fully, finally. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Into power, into freedom, into something hers. They left her waiting in the cold, so she left them stranded in their silence. Her phone buzzed steadily for 2 days, first with calls, then with voicemails, then with messages filled with frantic justifications. "It was just a mistake, Ma. We didn't mean to hurt you. It got out of hand. We were stressed. I thought you'd understand." The words bled together with desperation, but she didn't move to respond. She sat by the window of her small seaside room, a cup of warm chamomile in her hands, the scent calming, grounding. The screen lit up again, his name glowing with urgency. She watched it ring out, again and again, then silence. It came like a breath of clean air. For the first time, silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a boundary. She had spent years answering every call, showing up without question, being the first to apologize, the first to forgive, the one who kept things from falling apart even when she was crumbling inside. But not this time. This time, she chose herself. She didn't need to rage or accuse or plead for acknowledgement. She didn't need them to see the hurt. It was enough that she did. Somewhere in the noise, his new wife posted a vague message on social media, the kind meant to wound without being direct. Something about ungrateful elders and people who play the victim. Someone sent her a screenshot, but she didn't open it. What would be the point? Her days were finally full of quiet, honest moments. Long walks on the beach at sunrise, small conversations with strangers who asked nothing from her, and the rediscovery of her own company. A woman not defined by the roles she once filled, but by the space she was now reclaiming. She didn't need to defend herself. Her silence wasn't a punishment. It was her truth. A truth that didn't ask for permission or understanding. The love she had given had been real, limitless even. But love doesn't mean walking back into the same fire that burned you just because someone calls it a mistake. She watched the tide roll in with slow grace, waves whispering against the shore like an old friend. The phone buzzed once more, then stopped. This time she didn't even look. Forgiveness, she had come to learn, didn't require conversation. It didn't mean returning to the fire. Back home, the days felt slower, but not empty. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't rushing to accommodate someone else's needs. The quiet was hers now, not forced on her by neglect, but chosen. She stood by the window one afternoon, light pouring in like gold, and found herself reaching for the old box under her bed. Inside were tubes of dried paint, worn brushes, and a canvas she hadn't touched in years. The colors felt foreign at first, but as she mixed the blues and golds and soft reds, something inside her loosened. She painted without purpose, without judgment, letting her hands move as they wished. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be hers. A few days later, she reached out to an old friend, someone she used to laugh with before life got too crowded with responsibilities and expectations. They met for coffee, and the conversation flowed like it always had. No pretenses, no roles to perform, just two women sharing space and warmth. She joined a local book club on a whim, something she never allowed herself time for before. The meetings were small, cozy. Sometimes they didn't even talk about the book, just life, memory, and what it meant to be a woman who had given so much of herself for others. She brewed her tea just the way she liked it, strong, with a hint of cardamom and no sugar. No one rolled their eyes, no one asked her to change it. She wore the scarf she loved, but was once told looked too loud. Now it felt like a flag, soft, defiant, proud. The more she embraced herself, the clearer everything became. Peace wasn't the absence of people. It wasn't the loneliness she once feared. It was the freedom to move through a day without shrinking. There were still pangs, memories that clung like shadows, questions she'd never get answers to. But even those began to fade with each new sunrise she woke up to, untethered. The ache of abandonment was replaced by the quiet strength of rediscovery. She had spent so long believing she was too much, too emotional, too demanding, too everything. But she saw now that she wasn't too much. She was simply in the wrong hands, hands that didn't know how to hold something so devoted, so steady, so deeply rooted in love. And now, in the small rituals of her day, the brush against canvas, the swirl of tea in her cup, the ease in her breath, she found a new truth. She wasn't the burden. She was the blessing, just waiting to be held. By someone who saw her clearly. The table was smaller now, but it was hers. A single place setting, a folded napkin, the scent of rosemary and garlic filling the air from a dish she cooked just the way she liked. No compromises, no one else's taste to tiptoe around. Candles flickered softly, casting golden light over the walls she had repainted herself. Bright, warm, alive. In the background, an old jazz record played low, the saxophone weaving through the quiet like a gentle companion. She sat down slowly, her spine straight, her breath calm. There was no rush, no expectation. No one was late, no one had forgotten, because this time she hadn't forgotten herself. She poured a glass of wine and raised it gently toward the empty seat across from her, not in mourning, but in acknowledgement. She had survived the silence, transformed it. She smiled to no one and everyone. Then with a quiet dignity, she picked up her fork and began to eat. This time she ate at her table, alone and free.